In this video, we're going to take a look at the Alcon MR5s. Now, this is the Alcon MR5 here, 5-inch woofer, hence MR5, and there's a 10-inch woofer version, which is the MR10. I first heard these at Gearfest a couple of years ago, and it wasn't technically this version that I heard. I heard a different pair of Alcons, but noticeably the stereo image when I had a listen to those was highly impressive. Now what happened was they played this really nice percussive piece of music where the percussion moved across between the stereo field, and you could visually pick out that percussion just moving, and it really did sound great. And that's the same with these. Now I hooked these up, I've had them hooked up for a couple of weeks now, and Laurence is coming over to pick them up in about half an hour. When he does come over to pick them up, I'm going to get him on camera to have a talk about them. And the reason I'm going to do that is because the problem I have with doing speaker reviews is that I can sit here and say, yeah, these sound amazing, they sound good, but you never can hear them. With equipment, I can actually show you what it sounds like. You can't hear what these sounds like. So if you do get to go down to Gearfest in July down in London, you will be able to hear these. And yeah, I'd highly recommend taking a listen to them and hearing them in their space that they're going to have down there. So these are the MR5s. I'm really enjoying them. I think they're very, very good speakers. I'd recommend hooking them up with a sub. I had them hooked up on their own and they were sufficient, and you could get enough out the low end. I don't know about the MR10s. The MR10s you could probably get a bit more out the bottom end, but the MR5s, I hooked them up with my PMC subs and they really did sound good. So let's wait till Laurence gets in and comes to collect them, and we'll sit down and we'll go through some of the finer details of what these speakers are actually capable of. Thank you for coming in, and we have the MR5s here. First of all, what's the main difference between the MR5s and the MR10s?
The MR10 will be a larger unit. So this is the smallest of 3 proposed studio monitor loudspeakers, which will be arriving shortly after a long journey.
Has been.
So I think you first heard them about 2.5 years ago.
It was probably 2. Yeah. It was not last Gearfest, the Gearfest before.
The one before. So it's been long in gestation. The MR5 is a 2-way loudspeaker. It's full range. It doesn't go quite as low or have the power handling of the MR10, which is a 3-way unit. Or the MR12, which is also a three-way unit. But it does share the same high frequency and mid-low frequency. So you get the consistency when this is used as a surround loudspeaker, or in a smaller installation, this can be used as mains, up to 3.5 meter mix distance. And it can be bass managed as well if used as a surround loudspeaker.
So you've got a sub as well that you can put with this.
There are several subs already in the Alcons range, and also a Master Series, MR Series subwoofer that will become available, that we'll also be demonstrating this year at Gearfest. Yeah,
so at Gearfest, what's the plan for the system that you're going to have that people can hear?
So the room is relatively tight. But
is it the same room that we were in before?
Same room we were in before. The room's relatively tight. We have plans to put a 7.1.4 system in, so that'll be 3 MR10s, probably 2 of the subwoofers, which are a 12-inch sealed cabinet, and then obviously 8 of these, so left rear, right rear, left side, right side, and obviously 4 on the ceiling. We'll do that with an arrangement of trusses within the room. I think it's possible to get that in, and I think everybody wanted to hear it in an immersive environment.
I remember when I first heard them and we went into that room and I heard them in stereo, I was like, wow, this stereo image. Like I remember saying to you guys, that percussion that I could hear was just kind of dancing across, and I could follow it everywhere it was going, and it sounded amazing. And the first thought I had was, how would that sound in Atmos like that around the room? It would be, and then getting to hear that in Atmos, that's going to be great.
So I guess a little bit of history as to how this came about. I've been reselling Alcons in the UK since 2009, so we're into 16 years of doing it. And we started in sort of film and TV post-production, and around 2011, 2012, Atmos started to become a thing for theatrical film mixing. And I was specifying a couple of rooms that would be used for QC. One of them was for a film studio. And one of the things we found with the Alcons loudspeakers is we were able to get, I would say at the time we describe it as studio monitor quality, but in a theatrical environment. And one of the things we noticed, and in fact a number of the mixers and folks who were QCing and signing off the mixes were hearing, was that the panning of objects in Atmos was a lot more accurate.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for that is because the loudspeaker is designed to be phase accurate. It's all time aligned. And also in terms of the resolution you're able to achieve with the technology that's in the loudspeaker, you're able to achieve a greater amount of precision. So any objects that you're panning between loudspeaker positions appear as very, very sharply defined objects, as opposed to sort of a vague, a more vague, fuzzy location. And obviously this translation for stereo is you've got a very, very sharp stereo image, and that includes both positioning left and right, and also depth.
Yeah,
as you would hear what's reproduced.
Yeah, you can really get a sense of that when using them. I can visualize it as an object, and I can see it moving as it moves from speaker to speaker. So I can only imagine in Atmos moving around the room, you could literally follow that object like it's an orb circling around you.
And certainly the feedback we had, I think around 2015, we did a small Atmos room for a post-production company. It's a full theatrical room. And the feedback was, this is great technology. Can you make a smaller one? Because they've been buying smaller around this form factor for their other smaller studios, whether they be stereo. And at the time, there was a cinema product, a range of products for cinema, a range of products for high-end mixing, which were called the Cinema Reference Monitor series, and then obviously the sound reinforcement products. And so Alcons took their time to get to the point where they would decide to at least experiment with the idea, because ultimately the studio monitor market is quite crowded. There's a lot of products, there's a lot of different technologies, and it's quite competitive. And ultimately, I think Alcons were only really going to take the initiative to do something like this if they could actually make something that was genuinely different. And I think because the technology was developed, oddly enough, to solve problems of distortion in sound reinforcement, what they ended up with was a technology that went way beyond what you would actually be able to achieve even with traditional driver technology, even in studio monitor or even a hi-fi setting. And I think in some respects there's nothing new about the technology in terms of the principle of it. What's new is the way it's been applied, and the way you've got away from traditionally with what would be traditional technology for ribbon drivers. They're quite fragile by their very nature. Turned this on its head and actually made something that's considerably more robust than a compression driver. So I think there's been a lot of reasons why the technology that's in these loudspeakers has actually been able to trickle down from sound reinforcement, PA, through cinema, through film and TV and post-production into music studios, because it's already inherently incredibly low distortion. So you described some of the percussion, and this translates, I think, to a lot of live work. We've done some work in the United States with some front of house engineers who have said we can drive the top end a lot harder than we would have been able to on a traditional PA system. That means they don't have to put as much compressions on the drums and the hi-hat and the cymbals. Which, if you're at a gig and it's 110 decibels, quite often a lot of that's just gone. The HF is the first thing to give up. With the Alcons gear, it's the low frequency that gives up first. Obviously, you can scale subwoofers.
Of course,
you can add more of them, you can cluster them and whatnot. With high frequencies, it's difficult to scale with traditional technology, because you can make a driver larger. And then the frequency it operates up to becomes lower. And then after that, it produces a lot of distortion and breakup. And so I think with the technology, the pro ribbon technology that Alcons has been developing since the early 2000s, it does scale because the driver is arranged as a linear. It's a linear voice coil. It's vertical within this magnet. In fact, it exists here. It's sort of sandwiched between two pieces of metal, and there's some neodymium magnets in there. If you want to make a bigger one, you can just make it longer.
Right.
That really works in the sound reinforcement market for line arrays, because you make our largest PA loudspeaker is 14 inches, and then you couple it to another one and another one and another one.
Right.
And then you've just got a perfect vertical ribbon, effectively line source, that works from about 1 kilohertz up. So these actually work from a much lower frequency than a traditional HF unit, and even other sort of ribbon-like technologies. So it's scalable.
Right.
Second thing about it, a traditional loudspeaker driver has a voice coil. It's a coil of wire wrapped round, and then it's got a dome or a cone or whatever. And you're expecting that voice coil that has mass and the dome, the radiating surface, to move in and out in a predictable manner. Of course, as frequency goes up, that's going to change.
Yeah.
It becomes less predictable. And when you get less predictable behavior, you get distortion. And the second thing is it has mass, so it's got to start and stop. So again, you go back to that percussive track you were talking about, and what you're hearing is the loudspeaker is starting and stopping in accordance with the signal it's being fed, as opposed to starting and then continuing to move for a little bit afterwards. So what this has is it's got a voice coil that also happens to be the radiating surface. So if you like, the diaphragm in it, the whole thing is always energized back and forward, because it's very, very light, because it's also the radiating surface. It starts and stops a lot faster, even than soft dome. So you've got all of that transient energy under very, very high levels of control, which means what you hear is very, very accurate. There's very, very little that's going to be added to it. You put a signal in, it's a transient signal, and it will start and stop when you want it to. The other point about this technology is because it works down to about 1 kilohertz, you're not expecting the mid-range unit to go up to 3 kilohertz.
Sure,
and that has benefits too. So got a typical mid-range driver. In fact, it's the driver from one of these. Again, you expect the driver to move in and out in a pistonic fashion. It all moves together and you get predictable results. Again, at high frequencies, what happens is this outer section has mass and it starts to get heavy and it moves less.
Yeah.
And the sound doesn't come from the whole cone moving, and it just comes from the centerpiece moving. And then this part of the cone, and this is why loudspeaker designers spend quite a lot of time on this particular aspect, that then has to flex in a predictable manner. And then, of course, as the radiating surface goes towards the center of the loudspeaker, the dispersion naturally goes from something that's similar to this, which is 90 or 120 degrees, it goes down. So on a lot of loudspeakers, the mid-range unit will give over to, or bass unit will give over to the high frequency unit at high frequency, and it will already be beaming most of its sound forward with very little coming out of the sides, which means as soon as you cross over to the HF unit, suddenly you've got this step. And you can perceive that because you're suddenly receiving more off the walls, off reflective surfaces in the room. And that perception changes the way you would, it changes the relationship of the sound that comes out of this unit versus the sound that comes out of that unit at the crossover point, which means it can cause muddying and all sorts of things, and you lose definition. Whereas this is quite happy at 1K. It's still got predictable dispersion. This is operating down to a lower frequency, which means on the larger units we can push this down further. And then
what does the 5-inch go down to?
In this loudspeaker with the reflex tuning, it's around 40 hertz,
That's
minus
good,
3 dB at 40
And then
hertz.
you've got the sub to add to that. Yeah,
You've got the sub to add to that. You're down into the 30s with the 10-inch and also greater power handling. But ultimately, the crossover points are the same, which means, again, if you're panning an object between an MR10 and and one of these,
Oh, okay, yeah.
it's predictable.
Because that's like what I was talking to you about, moving from one speaker size to another.
Yeah.
In other systems that I've listened to, you can noticeably tell when you're going from one to the other.
Yeah.
So going from an MR10 to an MR5, there's very little difference in terms of what you're going to hear if you're panning an object into an MR5 from an MR10.
And indeed, there's other aspects to that as well. And certainly there was I think Gearfest 2 years ago, I was talking to somebody that recorded a lot of chamber music, and they were saying they tended to go for a two-way loudspeaker because they would find with sort of things like viola, it wouldn't sound quite right on a three-way because of the way the whole relationship of crossover points and dispersion, we assumed, messed with the tonality of that instrument.
Sure,
and so they ended up with two-way loudspeakers. We've kind of moved away from that by shifting everything down. This does a lot more than other HF units, not only up but down, and it's a lot more accurate. So really, I think from that perspective, it's it gives a different, it gives a cleaner response, it gives a faster response, it gives a more accurate response. And also, because it's light, it's very sensitive, which means it goes very, very loud. Because the voice coil and the heat dissipation, it's in open air. Also, you can put a lot more power through one of these. So a typical compression driver, say it's rated at 50 watts, you might get 100, 120, and then the voice coil is going to overheat.
Sure.
With this, because the voice coil isn't sort of wrapped and then wrapped round itself and then sort of hidden in a box, it's not enclosed, heat dissipation is a lot better, which means you can hit this a lot harder.
Right.
So you've got a lot more headroom as well. So what started out as solving distortion in PA systems has actually found its way into a studio monitor that we're actually quite proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I've had them for a couple of weeks now, used them, and they're sounding great. I can't fault them.
And I think you would have first heard these at Gearfest a couple of years ago. There were a few iterations that Alcons went through internally before they let them loose on the general public, and we took them to Gearfest with a great deal of humility, saying, again, it's a crowded market. We would like to offer this, and the first Gearfest was where we met you was should we make this? That's the question to the industry.
I'll tell you what, afterwards we all sat round having a drink, and everyone I was talking to, we was all talking about what we'd seen, what was tickling our fancy, and every single person was talking about these and saying how impressive they sounded. And it wasn't there wasn't an impressive room. It weren't like the room was this crazy room that sounded really good, and whatever speaker you put in there would sound good. It weren't the best of rooms, in my opinion, and they sounded amazing in that room.
Yeah, and I think here's the thing. We've had really useful feedback. I mean, people like yourselves who are, you're mixing, you're mastering. One of the things that a lot of people have said to us is they can work faster because they can make a decision. They can hear much further into what they're doing if they've got a plug-in, if they've got a piece of outboard gear, or they're just trying to figure out, what is that sound? Where did that come from? Why is that in my mix?
Also, might add,
it's
a lot more fun because you can see music. It's a really weird sensation when using them, that you can actually see this music in front of you, almost like I visualize where we're working in Atmos. You're kind of looking at things as objects and balls. You start to see these objects and balls even in a stereo image.
Yeah. I mean, you've worked with them for a couple of weeks, and it sounds like you've been able to make decisions. If it's similar to the feedback I've been hearing, you can make decisions quicker. Even in live sound reinforcement, a lot of engineers have said, we can just set it up and we're done in 10 minutes. Our sound checks it sounds good out of the box.
Sure.
The main concerns are getting aimed right so we don't have too much off-site noise. But generally speaking, they can set the faders and
the other thing is these can be soffit mounted into walls because we've got the amp that sits outside.
Correct, yes. I know there's been a few requests for an amp pack so that it becomes a standalone unit. We've not done that yet. I think we'll see how much resource we can put into it. All of my work has really been with immersive setups or multi-channel.
Yeah.
In most of those cases, you'll have the loudspeaker enclosed. You don't want something producing heat on the back that you can't get to.
No.
So we've kept the amplifiers separate necessarily. And we've got a couple of options. We've got a new 8-channel amplifier called the Director, which I think you've been using.
Yeah.
And there's a 4-channel convection cool unit. Actually, that's very welcome for people that have gear in their studios. They don't want fan noise.
Sure.
We've got a new 4-channel convection cooled unit, which has the same power handling.
And will there be possibly a 2-channel just for people who do want to use them for stereo?
Not at this stage, although if you buy the MR10, which I think if somebody's going to use stereo, I think they'll probably buy a pair of MR10s. Those are bi-amplified.
Right.
So the mid HF has a passive crossover built into it, but the LF section is handled by another channel on the amplifier. You'll have a 4-channel amplifier to do a stereo pair.
So you can you bridge, if you've got a 4-channel and you've got 2 speakers, can you bridge the 2 amps, and so you've got 2 work in one?
Yeah, well, obviously for an MR10 you would have a HF and LF. Or
okay, so you'll have sort of 4 channels on the amplifier will power the...
There wouldn't, with this, there's no real benefit in bridging.
Right.
Because it already, the power handling of the amplifier and the speaker, you've already got enough power there. You've got plenty of headroom on the amp, the speakers, all good. So that's not really needed. Where you might want to bridge is where you've got a multi-channel system and you might want to bridge the subwoofers just to get a bit more headroom there. So there are plenty of options with the 8-channel and the 4-channel to give yourself a system that uses all channels, bit of extra power for the subwoofers if needed. You feed everything into the Dart and the Dolby Dart sheet when you're designing the room.
Oh God, I'm not keen on going back to that.
We tend to pre-qualify all of our systems through that anyway to make sure that, firstly, we put plenty of headroom in. We don't want you to drive it too hard. You want plenty of headroom so you're not heating the voice coil and getting power compression, all of that kind of thing. We're used to having to do that for larger installations anyway. So I think it's really, we'll always try and pre-qualify that when we're designing a system to pass on to somebody like yourself.
Brilliant. I mean, let's leave it there because I've really enjoyed having them and being able to use them. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And thank you for taking the time to spend some time with them. We're always looking for feedback. I think we've worked very, very hard with a couple of engineers like yourself to develop this product. Certainly in the Netherlands, that's been the case. And I think we've got a product that we're very, very close to releasing, and we hope it makes everybody's life, professional life, easier going forward. Yeah.
So when is Gearfest? What is it, the 21st or is it the 23rd?
23rd of July, I think.
23rd of July?
I think it's on a Saturday.
Saturday.
It's a nice it's a nice weekend out.
So if you do want to hear them, the 23rd of July or the 21st of July, we'll have to check that. But the Saturday around that time at Gearfest, you'll be able to listen to them, hopefully in an Atmos setting.
That's the plan.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to it myself.
Thank you very much indeed.
Brilliant.